many members of Cantabile and a couple community members, and we're just glad that you're all here. And my name's Brian, and I'm the artistic director of Cantabile. And our next concert that's coming up here on May 9th and 11th, and again on June 1st, features a couple of more recently composed works. One of them a new commission, another that was composed a couple of years ago. And these are our composers of those pieces. This is Bill Douglas and Greg Simon. Please help me. And they were just chatting back and forth about their past as composers and their styles and what they try to do with music and why they do what they do. And I said, how about let's put a pin in that, and hopefully we'll just sort of jump in on that. And really the goal here is to just hear from you two about music, about how you got to where you are, why you are where you are, the kind of music you like to compose, why that is, and maybe a little bit about these pieces in particular. And in maybe like 15 or 20 minutes, I'll ask for maybe some questions from you all, but I'm also happy to just keep the conversation going as well. And really it's just about making space and providing an opportunity to hear from the two of you. And then just after this, we'll head into the sanctuary for Cantabile's rehearsal, where you'll hear these two pieces. So it'll be, or many of you will sing them. And just to be clear about this, let's see here. Those of you, I'll put you on the spot. Those of you who are not singers in Cantabile, would you just raise your hands? One. Whoa! All right.
Everybody's a singer.
Not a singer in Cantabile? Yeah, right.
Oh,
So we have just a couple, but mostly we have singers, but it's all going to be great. So, well, first, I'd love for each of you to just say a few words about who you are, what your connection to Boulder is. You know, Bill's been here for a nice long time, and Greg has passed here, as do I, and a little bit about how you kind of found your way to composition, just broadly and generally. So, Bill.
Well, I started playing piano when I was 4, started lessons when I was 4. I started playing bassoon when I was 13, and I've been composing now for 70 years. I'm 80 now, and I started at age 10 writing songs influenced by the early rock and roll people. I lived in Sudbury, Ontario at the time, 300 miles north of Toronto, and I was influenced by Little Richard, Vance Domino, Everly Brothers, and my first musical hero, Elvis Presley. I had his first 40 singles. Those were the days of 78 recordings, one song on each side, and very fragile. Anybody that old? I even played guitar and tried to move like Elvis. And I had a brother, I had 2 brothers and myself formed a band, the Douglas Brothers, and we played all over Sudbury, Ontario, singing my tunes. My first song I wrote when I was 10 was, first verse, please be mine, oh, all the time, oh, yes, indeed, please be mine.
How's the second verse there?
I love you in the morning and in the night, please love me and hold me tight. My second song, the words were a little more profound. I never let you go, even though you hate me so. Well, I love you forever, please don't go. Well, I never let you go. I think codependence happens even like that.
We have a couple quotes of those tunes in the piece we're going to be singing.
When I was 14, I got totally involved with jazz and classical music. And then I started writing songs influenced by the great songsmiths of the golden age of pop music, Gershwin and Irving Berlin and Jerome Kern and all those people. They were quite different than Please Be Mine. And I totally got into as I say, both those traditions. The most important musical teacher of my life I met when I was 14 at Tally Ho Music Camp, just south of Rochester. He was my counselor then, and he taught me how to listen to all the subtleties of jazz and classical music. And he said, if you want to develop yourself as a musician, as a composer and an improviser, and a performer listen to all the great music that's out there, composer, the whole classical tradition and the whole jazz tradition, listen to the greatest players and improvisers you can, and kind of absorb that music. So that became my main path of learning music, listening and playing along with them, and learning jazz solos and things like that, playing along over and over, listening to these pieces. By the time I was in University of Toronto for my undergraduate degree in music education, I became very involved with contemporary classical music, or 20th century classical music, Stravinsky, Bartok, Berg, even the atonalists, Schoenberg, Berg, and Weber. And I started composing music. This is not because it was fashionable particularly, but it's because I was really into this at this point in my life. And I went to Yale, I got a composition degree there. First a degree in bassoon and then in composition. And by that time I was writing pretty way out of dissonant music. Then I got a job teaching at University of CalArts, California Institute of the Arts. I taught out there for 7 years, 70 to 77, bassoon and piano and composition and improvisation. And there was a great African music department there and a great Indian music department. And I got very involved with those two types of music, African and Indian music and Celtic music. And all these influences started coming into my music. And I started writing tonal pieces again for my students. And I started touring at this point, 72 to 2002, with a great clarinet player, Richard Stoltz, and a classical player. We played, the first half of our concerts were classical, and the second half of our concerts were jazz and African and Indian, sort of a mixture of my tunes and other composers. I think that's about it. And then I moved to Boulder in '77, and I started teaching. I started the music program at Naropa Institute, now Naropa University, and I had a group that lasted for 20 years called the Boulder Bassoon Band. We had in our concerts anywhere from 4 bassoons to 8 bassoons. And in the 80s especially, we played all around Boulder. I don't know if anybody remembers the Boulder Bassoon Band yet. We played at all the jazz clubs, we played weddings, we played in concert halls. There again, a mixture of jazz. Oh, we had a lot of big band shouts we did with 4 bassoons and piano too, and drums too. So, we played 3 concerts at the Botanical Gardens in Denver. I remember we did Duke Ellington medley once, New Indigo, and A-Train, all on bassoons,
His thumbs going wild.
Yeah, thumbs go wild. Need a lot of thumbs.
So lots of experience with the bassoon. So writing for bassoon quartet, you were saying earlier that you've for the last handful of years you've been doing a lot of work with with the woodwind department at CU, and you were just saying you just finished you're about to write a 4th bassoon sonata.
I finished my 4th bassoon sonata. It was premiered on Saturday. Yeah, it's on CU. And I just finished my 4th oboe sonata. That was premiered about a month ago too.
Really?
And I was telling Greg, in each of these pieces, one movement is based on a jazz standard. I'm using the harmonies of the jazz standards, like Autumn Leaves, All the Things You Are, all those tunes. First movement of the bassoon sonata was Just Friends, lovers no more. But I write little tunes on these chord progressions, and then I write written out improvisations, and then it sounds like we're improvising, but it's all written out for the classical players to play them. I started making albums for the label Hearts of Space in '88, and I made about 13 albums with them. This is totally different from my atonal stuff. This is sort of new age stuff, but I call it just sort of classical music, based on folk music, and very influenced by Renaissance choral music.
Cool.
Like this second movement in the piece tonight, very influenced by William Byrd, Thomas Tallis, Josquin, all those Renaissance choral composers.
Oh, really? Oh, that's good.
So I started in 2002, I started getting commissions from double reed players to write pieces. And I've been writing mostly music for double reed players for the last 23 years or so. There's a publishing company called Trevco Music that publishes double reed music. I looked at their catalog. I said there's about 55 pieces of mine for every combination of double reeds plus woodwind quintets and string quartets plus bassoon, string quartets and oboe and things like that.
Just have music pouring out of you.
It's still going. Every day I compose.
There you go. Greg, can you say a little bit about where you come from and how you got to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my musical journey, I guess, as a trumpet player in 5th grade in Pleasanton Unified School District in California. And you know, it's always funny to revisit this journey because I am always reminded that I think my musical career really began one day in 7th grade where I wouldn't shut up in band class. And so the teacher made me stay after school to move chairs in the band room, which just happened to be the time the jazz band met. And I had never really thought about music as being something that you could make up, either as a composer or as an improviser, but I saw that group playing and immediately, you know, I get the saucer eyes and I'm like, I want to do that. And the next day I march in and I demand to be put in the jazz band and the rest is kind of history. For those who don't know, Brian and I went to college together at the University of Puget Sound, and I actually started as a music education major. Ultimately, I just decided that what I really wanted to do was create music. I loved being an improviser. I kind of started composing semi-organically. Like one day I just started writing stuff down, and I kind of thought, wow, this is kind of fun. I think I'll keep doing it. And then eventually people seemed to like it. So I just kind of kept pursuing those paths in tandem with one another, and ultimately that led me to a master's degree at the University of Colorado.
Who did you study composition?
At Colorado, I studied with Dan Kellogg and Carter Pan and the late great Richard Fensing. And all of them, you know, I carry all of them with me in the background. After I finished that degree, I just loved being here so much that I decided to stick around for a little while. And I played trumpet on a freelance basis and did a little bit of work on commission. And then eventually, when I was ready, made the leap to the doctorate at the University of Michigan. And that was kind of where I think I started really asking serious questions about, as you were asking, like, why do I write music? And what is it that I am setting up to solve compositionally? And I think for me, the answer has increasingly become, one of the things that I love the most about my musical life is that I get to move in so many different spheres. I spend a lot of time around concert music. I of course spend a lot of time around jazz, but my mom is a Chilean immigrant, and so I've been my entire life steeped in Chilean folk song. And you know, there is a solid line between jazz and funk, and so I've spent a lot of time in that world. I was in a Balinese gamelan for a while I was living here. I was a member of Gamelan Tunas Makar. And so I have all of these different musical plates spinning in my head at any given moment, and I think of my work, not so much as being influenced by any one of these over the other, but always trying to find common ground between them and sniff out, like, what are the threads that exist in all of this music that I love, and how can I bring them together? And that's something that's a question that I think is not only constantly inspiring to me, but it's one that I'm going to spend my entire creative life looking for an answer, and I'm probably never going to find it. And that in and of itself is exciting to me, because if there is no right answer, then by definition there's no wrong answer either. So I can just keep exploring. And that more or less brings us to where we are today, I suppose.
And so with that background in mind, Bill, you mentioned in passing that the second movement, the piece that we're doing yours has 3 movements, and then the second movement sort of has these Renaissance choral vibes to it, these long sort of interconnected lines and moving polyphony. Where would you say, like, looking at the first and third movement, which I think are more similar to each other than they are to the second movement, what would you, like, when you Similarly, what would you say about the first and third movements? Like, what are we going to hear? What are you thinking about?
I'll talk a little more about the second movement too, but
Yeah,
first movement,
talk more about the second movement too.
Brian, can I just interrupt and put mic so that
Oh.
Shelley can mount?
So I'll just start handing mics and stuff.
Okay, sure. This is, she's a reporter for KGNU, so she wants to record a couple things into a spot on the radio, if that's okay.
Oh, okay.
And then she's a check. Is that right?
Sure.
Yeah, cool. So, yeah, continue, go ahead.
The Boulder Bassoon Quartet had been after me for years to write a piece for bassoon quartet and chorus. And I wasn't too excited about that. Who's ever going to perform a piece for a bassoon quartet? Of course, I won't get into performances. But finally, I think it was in the spring of 23, I said, well, why not? She said, no. And then I came up with an idea of 3 Earth songs for bassoon quartet and piano. And I've always been a lover of classic English poetry, Yeats, Keats, Shelley, Wordsworth, Shakespeare, Blake, all of them. So I chose, actually, for the first and the second and third movement, I used already existing pieces, but I added bassoon quartet parts to them.
Oh.
And the second movement is William Blake, O Earth, return, arise from out the dewy, whatever it is, the night is worn and the morn. But in the middle of that, I felt, geez, I think I'm going to add a commonly used text in the Renaissance, Dona nobis pacem, the closing words of the Catholic Mass, grant us peace, that seemed to fit in with that.
Yeah.
And that little Dona nobis section is really the most contrapuntal section, influenced by William Byrd and stuff
Right.
like that. The first movement, I chose a poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins. I've always wanted to set this to music because of the rhythm in it, right? It's like a jig rhythm all the way, you know. His dark sunburn horseback round, his roar like howler rolling down. Inverness is the name of the piece. It's a town near Loch Lomond.
Right.
So he was in Scotland for a while, and he lived in Dublin the last part of his life. So maybe he picked up some of that jig quality in this, you know.
Well, I also read
it comb the fleece of his foam.
I also read that Inversnaid is also it's also the name of a stream that goes through the town, and so a lot of the imagery is about the sounds and the smells and the look of the colors, like the horseback brown is describing the calm pools, like the deep murky calm pools inside of the stream, which I thought was really cool too.
It starts out with this dark burn. A burn is a stream.
Right.
Yeah. And there was a waterfall pounding there, so. In Coupin and comb the fleece of his foam, flutes and low to the lake falls home. I think a lot of the time, except in the last verse, there's some meaning, conceptual meaning, you know, praise for the wilderness. What would the world be once bereft of wet and of wildness? Let them be left wildness and wet. Like long live the weeds in the wilderness yet. But in the first 3 verses, sometimes he's using the onomatopoeic quality of the words plus the alliteration and the rhythm and the rhyme to create the feeling. Not so much if you try to find the meaning of each, the conceptual meaning of flutes and low to the lake falls home, you know.
It makes it really nice. It gives it a really good opportunity to be set to choral music, you know, to vocal music, right?
Yeah.
Because it has that sort of like.
And the percussive quality of the words, so it's important to emphasize the consonants in those words. You know?
Yeah.
Decked with dew, dappled with dew, the groins of the braes that the brook treads through.
We have some of our choir members who are giggling because we've worked through these words. Dappled with dew, decked with dew. Yeah, all that good stuff.
And the real tongue twister, he bunny ashes sits over the burn. That's a church riff you wanted to get fast.
So Bill's been talking a lot about the text that he was choosing. Greg, why did you think of the text that you chose, which you could say a little bit more about?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've loved Khalil Gibran basically since I was 20, and I can't really put my finger on why, except to say that I think he writes in such a way that acknowledges hardship, but also like leaves you. It imparts this feeling of undeniable hope and optimism. And I am, as you can probably tell from my stage presence, an extremely anxious person. So like having, especially when I was in grad school and not sure whether I was going to have a career in music or, whatever, it was nice to have an author that I could sort of come back to and be reminded of the importance of not just grappling with difficult things, but also always looking forward with hope and optimism. So he's been a part of my life for a long, long time. And I always wanted to set his texts. But the process of getting permissions for texts is a cumbersome one, and it's not ever one that I would voluntarily insert myself into. And then you and I started talking about this piece. It would have been, back in September, something like that, right? Something like that. So we started talking about this piece, and literally the next day, I taught my composer seminar at the University of Nebraska. And I, for that, have a lecture on copyright law that I did. And as part of that conversation, you're going to get mic'd up.
Okay. Do you want to do it? Or are you doing it?
Just be careful because it's all on tape now.
Okay.
So I have this copyright lecture that I give. That as part of that, I like to just cobble a list of everything that's entered the public domain over the course of the last year. And I'm sitting in my apartment late at night, and I'm going through, okay, this is in the public domain, this is in the public domain, this is in the public domain. Khalil Gibran is in the public domain, especially The Prophet, which is going away my favorite text of his. And it felt like destiny, if you want to be really dramatic about it, I suppose. But more than anything, it was an invitation to just kind of reread that text, which I hadn't done in several years, and I still loved it. And I also, like, based on the conversation that we had about texts and about fitting thematically into a program that simultaneously sort of looks outward at nature, but also looks inward at the self. It was just a perfect fit, and I've always felt like his writing feels very spoken. It feels very human, which I think is not something you can say of all the prose that is out there. But it makes it for me really easy to set, because I think my goal when I'm writing vocal music is always to make a listener forget that they're listening to people singing, the same way you forget that Robert Downey Jr. is Iron Man. That you forget that Iron Man is Robert Downey Jr., right? To induce that little suspension of disbelief by the vocal music being so comfortable and so intuitive that it really feels like someone is just having a conversation with you. And that quality in his text has always spoke to me. So it was this confluence of all these different things that just, it made it feel right for this project.
Can I ask a question about copyright law?
Absolutely.
I usually use the old votes,
Sure, yes.
My understanding is that after a composer dies for 75 years, after 75 years, then it goes into public domain. Am I correct?
It is slightly more complicated than that because, and if I'm not careful, this is all we're going to talk about. So please cut me off.
In 10 words or less.
Yeah.
Would you talk about
basically
books and books of copyright?
Books and books of copyright. There are basically two eras of U.S. copyright. There's pre-1976 and post-1976. And poets who passed away prior to 1976 are generally accepted to be in public domain after death plus 70. Poets who published or passed away or have not passed away after 1976 are death plus 75. But there's all this weird, gray area in there. Like my favorite story to tell people. We're all, I imagine, fans of the timeless Christmas classic, It's a Wonderful Life. It's a Wonderful Life is in the public domain in the United States because someone at RKO Studios forgot to walk a single piece of paper from RKO over to the Copyright Office in LA in 1941. And because of that, it fell into the public domain. So like there's all these weird exceptions to it. But one of my favorite things to do for that reason is like look at the official Library of Congress list of here's everybody that went into the public domain on January 1st.
So can you didn't get to hear about your third movement. Let's hear a little bit about that. What what are we, we're about to go into the sanctuary here in about 5 or 10 minutes. Yeah, we've just got a handful of minutes here left. And so I guess the question I would have is, what are things that you might point out to listen for, or either in the text or in the music, or how they might be connected?
In terms of my composing method, first I have to rhythmicize the words, figure out what meter they're going to be in.
Oh, yeah.
With O Earth, Return, I had to do a 4/4 measure, then after that 3/4 measures. O Earth, Return, rise from out the dewy grass. So first I have to rhythmicize it, figure out how it's going to scan and everything, and what meter to put it in. The Echoing Green turned out to be all in 6/8, of course, and it's a very tricky rhythm. The sun is arising, make happy the skies. The merry bells ring to welcome the spring. So a lot of emphasis on those beginnings of those words. The skylark and thrush, the birds of the bush, sing louder around to the bell's cheerful sound, while our sports shall be seen on the echoing green, etc. So
you just sang that melody, and I will say that the thing that popped out at me about that movement, about that melody, is that it feels like a song that I would have learned growing up. It's like this little sort of trip-along folk song. When you're writing a melody, are you starting, like you just said, you start with the sort of tempo or the rhythm of the words, the rhythm of the poetry.
Yeah.
Would you say that the melody kind of comes to you sort of during that process, or is it something you're sort of figuring out after?
Well, I keep saying it over and over again until the melody just starts to come in. The sun is arising, make happy the skies, etc. And then I say that over and over again, and I say, what's the sun? And then I go on and kind of improvise the next couple of lines until I get the one that's just right,
Yeah.
And then when I'm on the 10th line, I go back and sing the whole thing, and then keep improvising until I get the right 10th line, that fits in with the melody, that has an organic flow to it, natural flow to it. So
Yeah.
I think that's.
And then, so would you say that you start with melody and then the harmonies kind of come after that, or does it depend on the piece? Is there sort of a consistent way that you kind of come to that process, or does it change depending?
Well, in a lot of my classical pieces, like I was talking about woodwind pieces, I actually often start with a chord progression, and then I improvise on that chord progression until, this is a good beginning of the piece. And then I go back to the beginning again, play what I've written, and then keep improvising until I find the next line, next bar on that. So, but in this case of O Earth, Return, it's sort of harmony and melody at once,
Yeah.
Or I'm doing the harmony and melody. And see, when I used to do that, this is a simple 1-4-5 kind of harmony. So right away I hear the harmony as well as the melody when I sing. It's a very simple folk song. I've been very influenced by British Irish folk music. I listen a lot to that.
Oh, okay.
Some of the most beautiful melodies in the world, come from that tradition.
What would you say, kind of, at least we'll talk about this piece in particular.
Yeah.
I shall raise my lantern is the
Yeah.
name of it. What would you say, was the kind of, what came, chicken or egg? In
Yeah.
terms of rhythm, harmony, melody.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think all the time when I'm writing choral music, that's something that Dave Tensing said to me when I was working with him, because I wrote a choral piece with him, that you also know. And he hammered into my head, choirs sing lines. And you can get away with literally anything in a choral context as long as it's part of a musical line that sings on its own. So it's one of the reasons that I love writing for choir so much, because it in some ways is a completely different type of composition than writing for instruments. The rules are different, and every choice that you're making, and maybe it's a self-imposed limitation, but regardless, it's a limitation that I accept, that I can do anything I like, but I always have to be thinking about how it fits horizontally within the line of that vocal part. So, chicken or egg, it's hard to say. I think when I was writing this particular piece, it really was a journey of like, okay, this is the sound world that I want to occupy. This is the sort of harmony that I want to explore here. Now my job is to solve the names. My job is to make those ideas fit into 4, 5, 6 beautiful lines that stand alone as their musical statement. And I always have the little dick dancing on my shoulder saying, as long as you do that, it's going to be great. As long as you do that, you can trust that the singers are going to get it.
Well, I think that's a commonality that both of your pieces have, is that the melodies inside of the larger context are really singable and really just sonorous, and they stick with me. Greg's piece is very thick harmonically, but if you just listen to one part at a time, it has this through line and this lovely kind of contour to it. And I think that's the case particularly with O Earth Return, and how all those parts weave together. And like I was saying about the third movement, it feels almost like a folk song that I've heard before. God, I know I've heard that somewhere. It just is so tuneful and intuitive. I think you both have written some really beautiful melodies, even in amongst sort of the complexity of how they might be set around. And we get to hear them here in just a little bit. Thanks.
Say one more thing
Yeah,
about the
please.
first movement there. It's Scottish, of course. So there's bagpipe drums and the bassoon.
Right.
And I've always been fascinated by African rhythms. A lot of African rhythms, in the bassoon part. And a lot of device that's used a lot in Balinese music and African music is hocketing, where there's a continuous rhythm that it goes between the instruments.
Right.
So bassoonists, as I told you, they have a tendency to slow down, and when they're doing that, because they're waiting for another note to come in, they gotta just keep that tempo going.
Keep that tempo
So that's the challenge in that first movement. Ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. And I've always been interested in medieval organ on that style by Puritan, and that comes into music, but also parallel fifths and
which also has pocketing in it as well. Yeah. Well, great. Well, we're gonna call it there. Sorry, this just sort of kept on moving. We didn't have any time to open things up to everyone. But we're gonna be in the other room in the sanctuary here in just about 10 or so minutes. We'll start our rehearsal with a short vocal warm up, and then dive into these two pieces. And there'll probably be some time for even, I'm sure, even more questions will come to light and be even answered. And so, thanks to the both of you for being here.